Hey Waffle Gang, I do hope you are well. My name is Mark and today we're checking out some more relationship stories. You've been absolutely loving them just recently, so I'll keep them coming because they have been quite interesting as well. If you do love a Reddit story, why not consider hitting a like, subscribe, and maybe that notification bell too, and let's crack straight on with today's first story. And as always, today's first story does come with an update as well. It's titled, My 26 female, Mum's 54 female, plan to surprise my dad 55 male with a divorce is kind of cruel. My parents have been married for almost 30 years. Their marriage is not great. My dad's the kind of person who will come home from work and get angry that there isn't dinner on the table. Growing up, my dad never treated my mother like an equal. She was expected to do all the housework and look after the children and dote on her husband at all times. My parents have been empty nesting for a few years now. I have one younger sister and we're both out of the house and have our own lives. Neither of us kids have particularly liked our dad. Like, we love him in the way that you love family, and we are grateful that he provided for us and helped us pay for college. But my dad is an arsehole who treats my mum poorly, and I never respected him for this. I recently got brunch with my mother, and she dropped some pretty heavy news. She's planning on divorcing my father. I was honestly relieved and happy for her that she's finally doing this, but her plan to do so is rather troubling. My parents are Chinese immigrants. My dad's best friend growing up, Daniel, and his family have been saving for a trip to the US for years. They will be visiting my parents over Christmas. My dad naturally put the burden of this whole trip on my mother. He told her to organize their whole vacation, planning meals, reservations, activities, etc. Basically, my mum is expected to be the complete tour guide and handle all the stress and organization of their visit, including picking them up from the airport. Well, my dad just gets to hang out with a childhood friend and not deal with anything. My mum doesn't even know these people. Apparently, however, this was the last straw for my mum. She is retaliating. She has only been pretending to organize this trip and faked a bunch of reservations and stuff to appease my dad. My dad thinks everything is organized and Daniel's family is being completely taken care of. Her plan instead is to serve him with divorce papers the day she is supposed to pick up Daniel's family from the airport. My dad will be out of town on a business trip until the day Daniel arrives, so she will be moved out by then. Daniel's family will be stranded at the airport and my dad will come home to an empty house and no family. While I support the divorce, I can't help but feel this plan is a little too cruel. She can be as vindictive towards my father as she wants, but to drag another family into this seems unfair. My dad completely deserves this, but Daniel didn't do anything, and his family doesn't deserve to fly into the US and face this level of commotion. Is it my place to say anything? I voiced to my mother my concerns and she was basically like, fuck it and fuck him. I barely talk to my father, but I don't know who I should reach out to or who I can talk some sense into. My dad has never been violent towards my mum or anything, but I'm also nervous about what would happen if I told my father the truth before my mum had a chance to gather herself and move out of the house without him being present. It just seems like an explosive argument waiting to happen. Wow. And we do have an update on what happens in the story. I haven't read it myself yet. As I said, I like to read along with you guys at the same time. And the thing that was going through my head is, you said you're finding it incredibly cruel. But I'm wondering what mum has been through with father to make her feel this way, to feel so strongly like, fuck him and fuck them or whatever, fuck the situation, I don't care anymore kind of thing. For her to be so done with it, this is how she's feeling. And, whilst I don't agree with leaving a family in the dust like that, it did leave me questioning how the mum is feeling in this. And I'm sure we're about to find out very soon. But we're going to cover a couple of the comments, then move on to the update. Your Franks who says, propose an alternative idea. Serve him divorce papers right before he leaves on his business trip, like as she drops him off at the airport. She can immediately leave and wait for him to go on his trip. Make his professional interactions agonizing so he loses face in front of his co-workers. Make him scramble to plan the trip himself or tell his friends to cancel. This still shames the hell out of him, what she wants, while making it less terrible on this random family. But he will still have to explain, so he will still lose face in the process, which is also what she wants. Be at home when she drops him off to help her get the fuck out as soon as possible and pack while she's driving him to the airport. Your participation in exchange for sparing this random family. I mean, it's not the most dignified plan, but it gets shit done without involving this random family as much, which is what your worry seems to be. Infinite Cobweb says OP does not need to play substitute wife and organize events. I keep seeing this in the responses and it's a really bad idea. If OP's father gets the idea that he can call on her to arrange things for him, it opens the door to an expectation of OP maintaining his house and life just like OP's mother did. OP should stay out of the events. Her parents' relationship is theirs to manage. OP's father is an adult and can make alternative arrangements himself. Fargirl says this: I've seen my family have these exact type of relationships. My aunt has a husband exactly like the dad here. My aunt always has to leave events or fun things we were doing just to cook the arsehole dinner, or she would be screamed at for hours. If my aunt was sick, hurt, or out of town, he would make his daughter do everything. Go mum. Being treated like a low-life servant with no respect for 30 plus years, she was waiting until you were all up, out, and established before getting out. She took a 30-year bullet for you guys, probably after realizing what a horrible decision she made, marrying or getting knocked up by this asshole, and made the best of it for you. That woman deserves some respect. Curious A. Crane says, do not get involved with your mum's plan. Seriously, just because he didn't abuse her physically doesn't mean she wasn't saddled with emotional abuse all these years, and she probably knows that shaming in front of his friends is the best way to get her revenge. Will Daniel feel some discomfort? Yes. Will it be life-threatening or put him in any real danger? No. He will most likely be embarrassed for his friend. I might not agree with what your mum's doing, but I haven't lived through her circumstances with your dad. As long as she's not physically and mentally hurting this other family, I say let it be. And one more from Nana Leone, who says, could you maybe quickly pitch in and do some planning for the visiting family? This is a horrible way for your mum to handle it, but what occurs to me is that she's trying to get out of the house while your father is out of town. She may very well be afraid of him and feels this is the only way she can escape. Now we're going to move on to the update. So update. Thank you to everyone who replied. It's been about a month since my post. Reading everyone's responses made a few things to me very clear that I especially had not thought of before. It is highly unlikely that Daniel's family being stranded at a large international airport in the US would be that big of an issue. They speak good enough English, they have cell phones, they have money, they have my dad's contact information. My mum's decision to wait for him to get his news until he returns from his trip is a strategic one, so she can move out calmly and safely. While my father is not physically abusive, he certainly would not let my mum leave comfortably. She doesn't need that stress. While some suggested that I step in and take over her duties, others claimed that it was risky for me to take over this role. My father may then just see me as a replacement for his wife. This may set a bad precedent. While I initially found her plan to be cruel, some of you rightly pointed out that surely this act of cruelty pales tremendously compared to the years of mistreatment she has dealt with. So Reddit, I opted to know nothing and do nothing. Here's what happened. Around the time Daniel's family was to be picked up, I get a phone call from my father. I decided, especially since this was the middle of a workday, to ignore it, because I frankly did not want to get wrapped up in the commotion. He called again and then sent me a series of texts, demanding to know the whereabouts of my mother. Now, if you recall, my father had been on a business trip this entire week. His first chain of messages and calls was when he had a layover in Denver. He was to be in Denver for 3 hours before he could get on his connection home. This means that, at this point, my dad is aware that Daniel's family has not been picked up, because Daniel obviously called my father, and that my mother was not answering her phone, but he did not know why. He also called my younger sister, who said she genuinely had no idea what was going on, but also lived out of state, so was unable to help. I later find out that my sister, who was also briefed by my mother about what might happen so that she wouldn't get caught off guard, and she was just playing a fool to help my mother along. I eventually text my dad back saying I have no idea what's going on, but I'm very busy at work and won't be able to get back to him for a while. My dad, unable to find immediate answers, told Daniel there must have been some miscommunication. He told them to get a cab from the airport to the house and just make themselves at home until my father could get to them. He gave Daniel the key code to the house, told him to call back once Daniel and his family were safely at home. Here's where things get a bit theatrical. My mother apparently attached the divorce papers to an easel with a nice big divorce label and notes and placed the easel right at the entrance hall to the house, so it's the first thing you see when you open the door. So as you guessed it, who gets the divorce news first? Daniel and his family. Daniel then has to tell my father that my mother is divorcing him. This is precisely what happens. Daniel recounts this to me in private later, which is how I know. But apparently my father went through a range of emotions, from disbelief to a fumbling stutter to anger, you name it. This, by the way, is happening while he is at the Denver airport, surrounded by his colleagues. He then has to, presumably, give some sort of explanation to his work friends and deal with an awkward and uncomfortable plane ride back home. Long story short, my dad was incredibly embarrassed and flustered. He had no idea what to do or how to help himself or anyone. Daniel actually ended up coming to the rescue because he is apparently quite the meticulous planner and had many suggestions for activities and sightseeing. Basically, Daniel took charge of his own vacation, while my dad fumbled around like a lost puppy, just tagging along on their trip while being completely discombobulated. I expected my dad to put on a fast for Daniel and his family and pretend things were fine, but he was unable to do that at all. I think he legitimately and honestly believed that my mum would never leave him and was too much at a loss for words to even be angry. Later on, I stepped in to help out Daniel's family and make sure they were doing okay, giving my dad some time to himself. Overall, while they weren't wine and dining quite the way they probably expected, Daniel seemed like a good and understanding friend, and they managed to have a productive vacation. Daniel said towards the end, when the shock had worn off, my dad and he were able to have a little fun. It was probably a good thing that Daniel was around to help my dad through it. As for my parents, in general, they're only communicating through their lawyers. My mum moved out to her own apartment. She hasn't told my father where she lives, and I'm completely staying out of it. My mum seems like a brand new person to me. I'm incredibly happy for her for being so brave and finally taking charge of her own life. My dad is pathetic and completely helpless. He's been wrapping himself up in his work and eating lots of takeout. I've been careful with my involvement. I will be supportive enough so he doesn't feel completely alone, but I am adamant to not become some sort of caregiver for him. I refuse to answer questions about my mother's whereabouts, but I do express sympathy for her. It's important for me to make sure my father recognizes that honestly, I am on my mother's side and that I never agreed with the way he treated her. That being said, I'm also careful not to antagonize my parents towards each other. I want this breakup to be as clean as possible. And then we have a section where OP answers some relevant comments. Yes, my mum works. She makes less than my dad, but more than enough to support herself. I would say in terms of distribution, my dad probably made around 60% more of our household wealth, my mum 40%. In response to a heavily downvoted comment about how OP's mum needed to take personal responsibility and walk away sooner instead of allowing all this to happen to her. Then says, I'm going to give you some specific examples of why she didn't just leave or take personal responsibility, because I think your victim blaming tirade is pure crap. Cultural stigma. Even grasping your head around the concept of divorce is such feat when you grow up in China and are raised in a traditional family. When every family you know follows the same pattern of subservient wife and oppressive husband, that mentality dictates your worldview, and it is way harder to pick up and leave it. Dependence. Even when you get over the cultural stigma, you come to realize that this man, your husband, is your only connection out here in the States. You moved to the US to be with him and your family. Everyone else you know is back home in China. Emotional manipulation. Do you think abusers behave this way when you first meet them? A classic pattern of emotional abuse is this kind of manipulation, where they are attentive and caring for months, even years, before their true colors start to show. By the time you get to that point, each instance of abuse seems like such a confusing and even just one type instance. You can justify it to yourself for years. Trauma. I bet you don't even begin to understand how much it fucks up your mental state when someone you were supposed to love and who loves you back continually treats you like a servant, who yells at you for not preparing dinner, who consistently embarrasses you in public for not complying. One time my mum was out getting her hair done and my dad stormed into the salon and yelled at her for not answering her phone. Children. My mum waited until both my sister and I graduated college and had our own jobs and lives before she even tried to formulate a plan for her own existence. This is a tremendous sacrifice and so incredibly selfless on her part. So some people have no options such as children or people being held captive, but this woman had options. Line makes 0 sense. I think you're self-righteous, especially since you hadn't read the post before you started commenting, is completely vile. And I think that last part there, where they went through the cultural stigma and dependence and emotional manipulation, moving to the US with your partner, I think all that information is so incredibly important and shows the mindset of what the person may be going through. And it's not that easy. We read a lot of these stories where people say, just leave the person. And it's really not that simple, is it? When you've been stuck in that position for so long, for so many years, you've got 2 kids who, you want to raise them and get their own jobs and have their own lives before you can even do anything because you're worried about what might happen to them. They may be in OP's position right now if OP had left earlier. They may be the ones pandering to father and doing all the chores and stuff like that on whatever father wants. And I'm incredibly grateful when people share that sort of information with us as well. I think out of every post, we can learn a little bit more about ourselves and just remind ourselves about what's going on out there all the time with other people. This is happening to other people right now. And whilst we can't do anything for them families right now because we don't know who they are, we can be reminded that it is happening. And it's a start, I think. And before we finish up, let's cover some of the comments that did reply to this update in the end. Limberine says, I'm so happy for your mum. I think you've played it just right. Thanks for the update. I wondered how things ended up going for her. But I'm Still Hungry says, warning, long story. This is so weird. Had to reread your title and make sure my siblings or my alter ego didn't write this post. We're the exact same age and our parents are the exact same age, and my mum just left my physically and verbally abusive dad last fall. As my youngest sibling left for college, we packed up essentials and disappeared. We had to hurry and move everything in less than a workday, U-Haul, and all in under 6 hours. So when he came home, our stuff was gone and there were divorce papers on the counter with a letter from my mum. It sounds cruel, but there was no way she could have done this in person and left unscathed. He left us threatening and guilt-tripping voicemails for months and even tracked her down at her work a few times, but she always saw his car first and hid. What's much crueler is abusing your wife and kids for 20 plus years and threatening to put a bullet in our heads if we ever told anyone, or did anything remotely out of line, which made for very dark and lonely lives for us, for all of us. We went no contact and the first few months were rough, looking over our shoulders constantly and dealing with the fallout with whomever he told his sob story. In the end, we really see this like a new lease on life. My dad doesn't know where we are and we're all breathing so much easier now that we're no longer essentially hostages in our own home. My mum got a new apartment and the furniture that she wanted, and eats what she wants, and sees her friends and goes on trips with her friends. She's become a totally different person, so much bubblier and happy. Oh, that one almost set me off. Noon Snack 2 says your mum is an inspiration for how well she handled that. I'm so glad you just let it play out. Great update. It also sounds like you set a good precedent for moving forward for your role in this situation. Black Fiesta says, reading this made my desk at work raise up a few inches from the justice boner I got. Best of luck to your mum. There had to be one, didn't there? Code Verity says, I'm happy for your mother that she got out of there, but I can't help but feel for the family. It doesn't matter how well you speak the language or how much money you have, having to figure out shit like that on the spot at the end of a long flight is crappy, and then being pulled into a messy private business at the end of it that they probably wanted no part of. I don't know. I'd be so incredibly uncomfortable if that was me. I don't want to be dragged into the middle of someone else's personal business, especially not something like divorce. So yeah, I'm really glad that your mum got out of there, but I still feel sorry for David's family. And one more from TX Blue Jay who says, first I was thinking that while I was happy your mum was getting out, I was sad for Daniel being put in such an awkward position. Then I read about the easel and I was totally enamored with your mum. What a spectacular move on her part. But again, sorry, albeit much less sorry, for Daniel having to live that moment. Proud of Daniel for negotiating those treacherous waters like a pro, and I wish I could hear his telling of the trip from Helltale to his friends in China. P.S. I hope your mum is happy, that your dad learns to cope, and that you and your sister navigate this yucky situation okay. Now, what do you guys make of this situation? What do you think about mum, Daniel's family? What are your thoughts on it? And I wonder what they're all up to now. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you did enjoy these stories. As always, you're incredibly important to the channel for you getting involved, liking the video, subscribing, becoming a member. Some people have had a few members just recently, and I'll be getting back on top of those membership announcements very soon. Christmas is absolute chaos at the moment. Please forgive me. Thank you for your love, your support, and your time, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Much love.
Wake up, get up, stretch my legs, eat some breakfast, milk and eggs, brush my teeth up, wash my face, throw my clothes on, start my day. Wake up, I can smell the smoke from the bacon. Let's go, see the sun shining from the windows. Okay, I know that today'll be a good day.